Right, I'm with a gentleman from Guernsey who is...
Jonathan Tocq, I'm the Minister for External Affairs.
Now, I interviewed you last in 2016 when you were running for election then. You were successful in that election, as you've been successful in getting elected ever since. At that time, you were hoping to be External Affairs Minister. That's what you aspired to be.
Yes.
But following that, you were Chief Minister, weren't you, after that?
No, it was before that, actually.
Was it?
Well, that's a good question, because I was Chief Minister at the time we didn't have an External Affairs Minister. And so the Chief Minister used to do both the domestic job, if you like, and the external job. And I argued strongly that we needed a separate ministry, if you like, for external affairs, because Jersey had done it. But also, I was criticised as Chief Minister if I wasn't in the island, I was going somewhere. I was criticised if I stayed in the island for something and I hadn't gone and Jersey had gone somewhere, or the Isle of Man had. So I argued for that. And, you know, I've been fortunate because I was the first to get the job. And when you're the first to do a job, you can't really be compared to your predecessors. No. So I was very pleased to do it because it was a part of the role that I felt was more me. And I've been pleased to be re-elected to that post since then.
Well, I've regretted. I've noticed, for example, Gibraltar, they had quite a good dialogue online with the UK government, External Affairs, and the public could access that, but they don't seem to do that much in the Channel Islands. These discussions take place, but we don't know what they are.
Yeah, I think it's probably because constitutionally Gibraltar a slightly different relationship with the UK, but I think they've done that sort of thing for quite some time. Right. There's no reason why we couldn't, but constitutionally we consider ourselves to be not a former colony, as it were, so that there is a slightly different history to that. We've always thought that our own domestic affairs was something that we privately talked about.
Something to change, I think, for the public.
Maybe.
Things have changed quite a lot since 2016. You've had a very much different electoral system. Does that work as far as you're concerned? I mean, you've had...
Well, it was not one that I voted for, but then I was on the organising committee to make it happen. Right. I'm not quite sure why my colleagues put me on there, because, as I say, I was not in favour of an island-wide election. Having said that, we did our best, because if you're given a mandate by the people to change the electoral system and bring in something else, you try and do your best. And of course, then COVID hit as well, so we had the problems of trying to work out how best to run an island-wide election for 38 seats with 120 candidates or so. That wasn't easy, but I think, all in all, it ran pretty well.
Viewed from a distance, I thought it worked extraordinarily well. Yeah. I was amazed that people handled the numbers involved.
They did. I think the thing that was missing, perhaps, or if you compare it with what we had before, the difference was the lack of ability to really scrutinise at hustings, where you get people in public asking questions, others listening as well. You could do that one-to-one, but you couldn't really have a hustings with 120 candidates.
No. The other aspect was a bit like mushrooms. All of a sudden, just before the election, several political parties, so-called, sprouted from somewhere. Yeah. Now, do they still exist?
Well, the one I joined doesn't. No, well, in terms of the people that were part of it have resigned from it, and it is no longer operating as a political party. But the other one that did manage to elect some members into the Assembly still exists, the Guernsey Party, and I work on our senior committee with one of those, in fact their leader, Mark, and get on very well. I learned a bit of a lesson from this. Years ago, I was in favour of political parties because I saw opposition in Guernsey, and obviously I go back a long way to 2000, and I think the thing that shocked me to begin with was the lack of disciplined opposition. So there wasn't a focused government. I mean, there is more now, but there wasn't back then, and perhaps because of that, there wasn't a focused scrutiny and opposition. And so it was difficult to get a debate that was clear in its policy options. I think the parties haven't really helped that, and partly because I don't think Guernsey is... It's not a matter of being big enough, because Gibraltar has parties and seems to operate quite well like that. I think it's more in terms of its culture. I don't think we're geared that way. And I think the danger is people will look north and see, well, it's all like in the UK and it's a bit of a nonsense in the UK, so I don't want it here. It doesn't need to be like that. But I think if people's culture is such that all they can think of is the UK party system and how dysfunctional that is, that it won't work well in Guernsey. So I'm an independent. I think I'll always be an independent.
I think, yeah, what I miss about the structure, the one that's evolving in Jersey, and I can't quite, you don't have like a shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer to challenge things on an economic basis.
Exactly.
You have to take what they tell you, and it's very difficult for the lay person, the ordinary person, to analyse it, because it's just too big.
Yeah. But then if you start doing that, you do need to pay, if you like, to fund proper research to make it happen. So parties that function in that way need the resources behind to make that work, because they won't be able to use the same staff that produce the other thing. So that's a limitation. I'm not sure how Gibraltar get around that, or if they do. But you're right. I mean, that was sort of my reasoning for years ago, thinking that parties would help to bring that sort of challenge about.
Yes, the other aspect now, of course, you do have a limited scrutiny element, but it's not like the Jersey one, very formalised.
No.
So, I mean, I've never quite understood how they choose what they're going to scrutinise. I've never quite understood that.
No, I mean, to be honest, I don't really understand the Guernsey scrutiny, because we've still got a committee-based system, largely. So we have scrutiny built into the departments anyway, in that it's not one minister and a deputy minister making all the decisions. There's always 5 others, and sometimes some non-states members as well on certain committees. So we do get scrutiny with it. It's not public scrutiny, so that's a bit different.
No.
It could become that. I think our scrutiny committee, I mean, they held a hearing today. They're improving in what they do that's appropriate in Guernsey, but even then, those that take an interest tend to be the media, not the general public.
Well, they sort of say here, scrutiny is a good place for politicians to get a bit of experience. Yeah. Whereas, in fact, you want very experienced politicians
to be doing that.
To doing the scrutiny.
Right,
That's one of the problems, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where'd you get them from?
Well, we're doing a little better on that this term, I think, because not only is our chair of scrutiny, president of scrutiny, Yvonne Burford, who's been a minister in a previous government, she was my environment minister, but the system in Guernsey means they can choose on panels to have other members of our assembly. So, for example, today they chose Lyndon Trott to go on a scrutiny of economic development. Now that's appropriate, because Lyndon's been around, he's been chief minister before me, he knows it well. So I think they can improve matters, and they're beginning to do that.
The other aspect about Guernsey which puzzles me, you do have a parish system, and it seems quite lively at the moment. There are elections going on, and I find that rather encouraging. I'm not a great fan of the constables being in the States in Jersey, but you've eliminated that problem, and you're still alive, you're still surviving. But there are some parishes which seem to actually engage the public with discussion, even about things that are going to happen in the States. Now, I think that's quite an interesting development.
Yes,
Does that work? I mean, is it a valuable contribution or not?
It is. I mean, it's not universal. I mean, obviously we've got some very small parishes. I think the difference in Guernsey is that, parishes like Torta, for example, with 800 people or something like that, they're not likely to do it. Although, having said that, they're a very lively parish in other ways. But I'm very proud of my parish, the Catel, and politically, the Douzaine is very healthy, and they often, have been involved in some of the most effective engagement with central government on things, and they really do read the BA when it comes out. They get involved in those sorts of things. So I think the differentiation hasn't been a bad one in Guernsey. I think there were some people that were upset when Douzaines were no longer involved in the assembly itself. But one of the things that I think I'd like to see more of, and perhaps we will now that the health of the parish system seems to be back, is to delegate more from central government to the parishes, so that these groups of 12, the Douzaines, or in certain cases Vale is 20, although they still call them a Douzaine, but there should be a vingtaine. But anyway, they they could do a lot more. Right. They're willing. Many of them are willing to do a lot more. Now, it may mean instead of the smaller parishes, they'd have to group together to facilitate that. But I think there's a great willingness to look into what's possible. There's lots of things that we do in central government that really shouldn't.
Well, this is one of the things I feel that sort of makes the job impossible, to be a Mr. Do Everything. Yeah. Local, national and international. Yeah. Now, you're dealing specifically with international because you're on that. You've got the job. But parishes could do so much more on the local level, couldn't they?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I mean, in fact, my portfolio, my full title is Minister for External Relations and Constitutional Affairs. So right. I have the constitutional part of it, and that does concern me because the parishes are part of our constitution, and they're a very big part of the link back historically to the Crown. Right. And I think if we lose that, my father was a parish member, a Desineer, on the parish council for many, many years. And in fact, that probably was my first exposure to politics. He used to bring BAs home and talk about those sorts of things. Now, that's healthy in a small democracy, and I think we need to find ways, I would like to find ways in which we can bring a new generation up who either that could be the first learning curve for being involved in something bigger, because that in a sense for me was that I didn't become a Desineer, but many in the past used to do that and saw that as a progression. But I think the whole thing, local and international, is sort of linked together. We've got an identity in Guernsey and Jersey, very similar in this. We want to protect our identity. We don't want to just become like part of the rest of the world. We've got something also to give to the rest of the world, I think, and particularly through organisations like the Commonwealth, which we are active members in. Well,
you're not actually members, as I understand it. You're, by virtue of your associate status with the United Kingdom, you're deemed to be members.
Okay.
So if you were to, whatever you have to do, pay your subs and become a full member, it would give you, I think it would be benefit. Well, personally.
I sort of agree with you, but that is a constitutional matter. So what I was really referring to is the Commonwealth institutions. So the Commonwealth institutions we are fully active in, but we are not voting members of the Commonwealth itself.
No.
And that is a matter that would need to be dealt with, constitutionally. But I think there's more that, before we get to that stage, there's more that we can do. And we're beginning to do that. So a lot of our members in Guernsey are getting involved in, for example, being electoral overseers, scrutineers in other parts of the world.
That's interesting,
some of them are being asked to give their advice on reform, particularly in the light of our reforms that we've been. So that there are sort of doors opening up elsewhere, and I'm really pleased to see that happening.
Because you don't, rather like Jersey, there's a bit of a gap in the system pertaining to international obligations and treaties.
Yeah.
Now, there's no one person or department which is specifically the person you go to if you want information. No. Now, in the planning law here, as I keep reminding everybody, it says there are 350, or it did say 20 years ago, God knows how many it is now, 350 international treaties, conventions. I can't find out what they are. The most I can find is 70. So that's the only one they're admitting to.
Right.
So there ought to be an absolute certain list of what things the islands are signed up to, didn't there?
Yeah, it should be done. And that's partly because in the past, up until probably about the 1960s, or certainly probably just before that, before the Second World War, there weren't that many treaties.
No.
And the UK would sign them on their behalf, and we didn't really need to even think about being involved. Since the 1950s, there's been increasingly more and more. Now, in some cases, they've been extended to us through Act of the UK Parliament.
Exactly.
By volition, we've wanted that. Others, we've decided to ask for extension to, in which case we've normally got some record of it here, and it's normally in a department of Jersey. And only in recent years have both islands established external affairs and constitutional departments that can actually look at, okay, well, do we want this? And if so, how are we going to negotiate it? So I was involved, for example, in the last few years in negotiating a social security agreement with the government of Latvia. Now, that was the first social security agreement, I think, that wasn't the first, it was the second, but that it's the first one we've asked for and negotiated on our behalf, on behalf of Guernsey. We were given entrustment to do that, which is the right to do so. But it's my belief and desire that we should have more of that. But I think it will be an evolution, because there's a certain nervousness naturally that we've got the capacity as small jurisdictions.
It was one of the questions I asked you back in 2016, which you'll have forgotten all about, was about this international identity, this personality. Yeah. And that's obviously a theme which the islands are trying to develop, and the Isle of Man as well. But of course, the UK government will obviously have concerns about whether their identity is not too dissimilar one to another and too dissimilar from the United Kingdom. Yeah. So there has to be a lot of discussion. Does it take place? Do you discuss with the Isle of Man, Jersey?
Well, yes, far more now. What's interesting in my time, one of the good things of Brexit has been it's forced us to have those discussions, and it's forced the UK, if I can say so, sometimes who've been unwilling to really get down and talk about these things. Sometimes they paid lip service, and that'd be a good idea to discuss at some point. But now we've had to, because Brexit has raised all sorts of constitutional issues for us. So because those doors are open, I'd say our regular contact between the Crown dependencies and between governments in the UK, government departments in the UK on such matters is far more intense, far more real, and far more open to solutions that otherwise in the past would never have been looked at than it ever has been. So I'm really pleased about that.
We'll have to stop fairly soon, but not from my point of view, but you've got other things to do. The independence possibility, does that ever feature in your discussions with the UK?
No. Not from I don't want to see independence.
No.
Well, it depends what people mean, because some people think we've got independence already. There's some people that think independence means the Queen would no longer be our monarch, or Duke of Normandy or whatever, head of state. There's some people that would want to see us have our own passports, and that. And really, I don't agree with any of those particular points. I like the relationship we have, but I think it can be enhanced. And so I've used the example, for example, of the Faroe Islands. They are part of the Kingdom of Denmark, and yet they can sign treaties internationally separately to Denmark. So they've been able to sign treaties that Denmark have no part in. We've not yet had that sort of position. Our treaties are versions of the UK treaties normally, if we've had something to do with it. So even that social security one with Latvia, it's like a watered down version of the UK agreement before, but it's specific to Guernsey, so that's okay. I think that is going to have to come at some point. The thing is, we won't want it in all things because we're small. So, would we want? And we're getting this already to a certain degree. We've had to join the World Trade Organization, which we weren't part of before. That brings in all sorts of responsibilities and duties.
Is there a cost implication becoming a member? Yeah.
Yes. The cost implication is we've got to regulate things far more, and we've got to provide this degree of scrutiny and this degree of oversight to stuff, and we've got to make sure that we have X, Y, and Z in place.
In other words, more outside examination.
Yeah. So the only way in which we could effectively do that, cost effectively, I think, is for Guernsey and Jersey to cooperate more. But we'd be here all night if I start talking about that.
Finally, you did mention briefly in your talk tonight about fishing, and then you said we're not going to discuss fishing because obviously it wasn't relevant to what you were talking about. Are there implications in fishing for you which will affect Guernsey?
Oh yes. I mean, we are sort of ready to proceed with a new regime in Guernsey, but if our neighbours here to the south or to the north do not manage to find their own peace with France, particularly, we will be inevitably caught up in it. We can't do anything. We have managed to get to a place where the licensing of vessels under a new regime is acceptable to France. I don't want that to be lost. So I'm just holding my breath and hoping that we can see, hoping and praying, but we can see Jersey and the UK come to an agreement with France. And I know it's not easy, because I've been involved in some of these things. I've been a listener in some of the conversations that have happened around, because it does affect us, as I say. We can't help but be affected by it. And I feel particularly because in Guernsey, fisheries is not something, well, it affects Alderney and Sark, and our waters are large, and to police those waters will cost us a lot. But Alderney, the states of Alderney and the chief police of Sark have their own jurisdiction over their fishing. They've got domestic laws about that. So Guernsey cannot control what they do. Trying to herd all of them together into a position where we can make an agreement on it hasn't been easy, but we are ready to do so. And so it's really up to the other players to get it right.
I want to talk with you for another 20 minutes, but I'd better finish. I'm very grateful to you.
Pleasure.
Bye.